how do you feel like most young adults, Gen Z, how do we come across?
That's a great question, Connor
Yeah.
Atkins. So our listeners know your dad, Pastor Mike.
Yes.
They may not realize you yourself are on staff here at Grace. You are the care and groups coordinator.
Yep.
You're also overseeing the young adult ministry,
Yeah.
really. I want to get your take on the shift we're seeing with young people. A lot of people have thought that Gen Z was going to be the most like unchurched post-Christian generation of all time. And lately we're seeing this trend where Gen Z is coming back to church.
Yeah.
Why do you think that is?
Yeah, I think, it's interesting because I've been seeing studies about that too, and it's super exciting for me, coming up alongside Gen Z and seeing them all return back to the church. I think a big part of it is because, you have AI, social media, all of it feels very fake, and the church has something to offer that's real, something that's backed by thousands of years of church history and tradition, and I think that's something that is unique about the church that's really going to shine in the coming years of artificial intelligence and all that craziness.
Do you feel like your generation has really grown up with AI being a big influence?
I mean, maybe the younger people in my generation. I'm like right smack in the middle of Gen Z.
Yeah.
So I don't know. It's still relatively recent. I feel like I've only started using it a ton in the last year or two.
Well, it's funny because
So-
even when I talk to my kids, and I saw a comedy bit about this that was so funny, where the guy was telling his mom, like, Mom, she's like, look at this amazing picture. He was like, that's AI.
Yeah.
But my kids will say it like that, bro, that's so AI. And they can spot it. Where someone like my mom would be like, wow, this puppy dog is jumping off a waterfall or something.
Yes,
and
that's
you're like,
that is very real because I'm telling you right now, I've got a pretty good eye for it. Rarely do things like catch me that you'll go in the comments and you're like, oh, I can't believe I believe
right.
that. But my dad, you heard it here. He'll send me stuff all the time that I'm just like, jeez, how did you fall for that? I mean, it's pretty remarkable. Very wise man, but not hip on the AI stuff yet.
Well, it is something that it's like when you're in it, you can spot it. I feel like that with ChatGPT. With I am not in it with social media, but I will say, working with younger people, I've realized like they just get it, and you think some of that might drive people wanting to be back in an atmosphere where there's like tradition and things like that.
Yeah, I mean, you'll see crazy things now. I mean, like Instagram or Meta, whatever the parent company is there, they're like, I saw something the other day, Mark Zuckerberg said, he was like, I think the future of friendships and we're going to solve the loneliness problem in the world by having people talking to like AI chatbots, essentially. And I'm just like,
that's so sad, isn't
I
it?
don't know that that's going to work. I'm not too optimistic about that approach, Mark. But I think there's something real at the church. We have community that to offer. We have, like I said, thousands of years of tradition and history, and it's a lot. It's going to be a lot harder for someone to come along and, not believe in that, or what's the word I'm looking for, disqualify what the church has. I mean, we've stayed relatively consistent on our core values for thousands of years. So,
what would you say specifically? I know you said community, but that the church has that's real to offer.
Yeah, I mean, I think community, and I think the most obvious one is the scripture. Like I said, I mean, studies. You look at the Dead Sea Scrolls. I mean, we found these scrolls of the Old Testament from, I don't even remember the date that they said that they were written, but like that over 1,500 years ago, and they match up with scriptures that we have today. And so it's remarkable to see like, wow, there is a level of consistency there. And really what it is it's God's hand in it. And I think it's true for the scriptures. I think it's true for, the church in its history as a whole. I think God is working in this, and he's adding a layer of consistency that he knew we would need, and now we're seeing that we need in the world of a lot of fakeness.
Yeah.
That's
Where do you
what I
think anxiety fits into the conversation? I know Gen Z has been called the most, not just like said, but like statistically shown to be the most anxious generation of all time. Do you think that's part of what's driving them back to spirituality?
No.
Okay.
I think
I love that.
I think that anxiety is the effect of not being in the church and not being in a relationship with God. I don't know that it's necessarily driving people to the church. Those who I love who have experienced anxiety on some pretty severe levels, it's almost, in my limited experience with it, more paralyzing than it is motivating. And so I think, we see other motivators of getting people into the church, like a desire for something that's different, something that's new, something that's has real lasting effects. I mean, anybody can, feel joy or happiness for a moment, but I think what Jesus has to offer, and oftentimes through the church, is something that is lasting.
So what would you say to a young person maybe listening who feels like they're disengaged from church? Why do you think young adulthood is a pivotal time to be in church?
I think for most young adults, just for starters, it's easy. I mean, it's easier to get into the church now than it is going to be later. Not to say that it's easy. Easier is the right word there.
Mm-hmm. You mean because you have less responsibility?
Yeah. I mean, later, most young adults, I would say, probably aren't married, probably don't have kids. Mm-hmm. So there's an easy opportunity there to say, okay, I have time. I can commit myself to something now at a higher, level of commitment than I probably can later in life. So I would say that's the first thing that comes to mind. But also, the earlier you can start habits in your formative years, and I would still say young adulthood or formative years, I think the better. I mean, it's compounding. It grows over time, and the return you get on that is going to be better the earlier you start.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah.
So this one of kind of the popular words that gets thrown out a lot is deconstruction. There's this thought, I think, that a lot of people are deconstructing from their faith. A lot of young people grow up in the church and then deconstruct, or they question things. Why do you think that they... Well, let me ask you this first. How would you define deconstruction?
That's a big question. How would I define deconstruction? I think it's the process of looking in the wrong places for the solutions to your problems. Isn't that
that's good?
Just right off the top of my head.
I really was going to say you had no prompting on that. Say it one more time. It's the process of looking in the wrong
places for the problems that we have.
Okay.
Or for the answers to the problems we have. I don't know.
Yeah.
I'm still workshopping it.
Yes.
I think that's the general gist of it. Like when you're deconstructing, essentially you're saying, I don't think this is working for me. I don't think this is enough. Or you're saying there's something better. There's a better option than the church or the faith or Jesus for my life. And I think a lot of that, just to be honest, is rooted in sometimes, unfortunately, poor teaching from the church. And then I've seen it a lot with people I know personally. Bad parenting, to be blunt. I don't think that's always the case. But I think when you have authority, whether that's parents or the church, that is, super strict, super constrained, in the wrong places, in areas where the scriptures aren't, then you see people kind of rebel against that, the moment there's an opportunity to do whatever it is that people want to do outside of the church, they want to take it.
Yes.
Yeah.
Just this past weekend, your dad said, it's okay to doubt, just don't stay there.
Yeah.
I love that. So what would you say is the difference between doubt and deconstruction? Yeah,
I think deconstructing is like actively choosing to go in a different direction. Whereas I feel like doubt is something that a, Bible-believing Christian can do. I don't think that doubt is something that necessarily invalidates your faith. Whereas I would say deconstruction, maybe, it's walking away.
Have you ever gone through a season of doubt?
Yeah. I would say that, I'm never not in a season of doubt. I just, I feel like there are levels to that, of course. There are seasons of doubt that are bigger and, stronger, more powerful. You feel it, they weigh on you more. But I think doubt is essential for faith. If you're going to have faith, there has to be a level of mystery there, or else it's just fact.
That's really interesting. You've never had a season where you haven't had some form of doubt, you're saying?
No, I wouldn't say so. There's seasons where I don't think about it,
yeah.
like maybe ignoring it a little bit or not facing the problems, which I think is probably more dangerous than facing the problems when you ignore it or where you don't think about it. And that can tend to stack up and lead to those seasons where you're like, wow, this is such a part of my identity. But I think, for the most part, my whole life has had some questioning or doubt in it, and that's where faith comes in.
I I really love the way you just said that, because I feel like it's like an exhale. It gives us all the freedom to be like, oh, it's not a bad thing. That you're right, because if to say there's no doubt in your life at all, you have perfect faith. Of course, there's some degree somewhere where you're not trusting God, you're doubting. You may be aware of it, you may be actively avoiding it. But you're right, that mystery is part of what makes it faith instead of sight. So, okay, let's talk about what you're learning at Grace about the importance of connection. Tell me about that. I know you work in that sphere.
Oh, yeah, totally. I mean, I think connection is everything. I think God wants us to be in community with one another. I think it makes us stronger in our faith. It makes us stronger as people. And when we remove ourselves from that is often when we can see, some of, deconstruction. It feels like such a buzzword, but that's that deconstruction that happens is when people remove themselves from community. Like you said, I work a ton in that aspect of the church. I do a lot of stuff with small groups, and I think that stuff is crucial.
You're very influential with young adults. I think that there's social media, there's AI, like we said, there's a lot of loneliness. They're coming back to church. How do you get them deeply bought in and connected at church? Yeah,
I think you have to find a common thread between people. People like people that are like them, if that makes sense. And I think sometimes that can be hard to find, but the church, the beautiful thing about it is that we all have that common thread of faith, of belief that normally ties us together. So I think, using the weekend experiences, the sermons, our young adult nights, which are big young adult events and gatherings that we have, to kind of remind people of like, hey, we have this common thread. We have this unity together, and then providing practical opportunity, jump out into a small group or, whatever that might look like.
Yes. Okay. Since you brought it up, I'm going to go there for a second. Young adult night. Tell me a little bit about that. What does it look like? What is it at Grace? Yeah.
So it's 3 times a year, and it is an event to around 200-300 young adults will gather together. I'll teach. We usually do something else fun before we've done panels. We did a live Grace After Hours episode there one time, so that was super fun. But it's worship, community. We have dinner. People love food, bonding over food. That's what I should have answered.
That is essential.
It's important. But yeah, it's just an event we have 3 times a year to rally people together.
I just interviewed your dad and another pastor in the area recently, Pastor Colin, about mentorship. And something I think your dad said is that when you walk into young adult night, the vibe is just different. There's a feeling about the worship that is alive and engaged in a way that it just doesn't feel the same on a Sunday morning. Have you felt that?
Oh, yeah, totally. I mean, I think there's tons of contributing factors to that. I mean, we put a lot of hard work into making it a special, exciting event for people. But I also think that, like, my generation, it's just something that I've noticed as a trend in our generation, is that the average churchgoer is, really, 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 really excited for worship and maybe a little less excited for the teaching. Not that they're not excited for it, but...
About your generation, you're saying. Yes.
Yeah. So it's interesting to see, like, I'll attend other churches or, events, and they'll have 2 hours. That's not an exaggeration. 2 hours of worship up front before you get into the teaching. And this is, just my personality as a teacher. I connect with the teaching more. So it's interesting to see, like, most of my friends are the opposite.
Why? Why do you think young people connect with the worship so much?
I think, the teaching, if it's done well, hopefully not, but there can be a level of detachment, whereas worship is very involved and it's very vulnerable. You come to young adult night and there are people on their knees crying, worshiping. I mean, like almost face to the floor, and that's bold. That's bold worship. And I think God honors that in a ton of ways. I think that level of vulnerability is going back to that kind of like communing with God. It's in relationship with God. And that's not the only way to do it. I'm not saying the guy with his hands in his pocket isn't doing that, but it's just different expressions across the board. And I think there is a temptation for older generations to look at what Gen Z does in worship and say, "Ooh, that's really performative." I hear that word a lot. That's performative. They're putting on a show,
right?
Because they think they're more spiritual. And I think some probably totally are. I think that's probably the case. But I always think to myself, I'm like, okay, if you're in a room and this guy's worshiping with his face on the floor and you're standing there judging him, like, it's, I wouldn't
Is that really bad?
recommend it.
He's performing and you're judging him.
So it's just like, I mean, stay in your own lane. I think people
Yeah.
express themselves differently, but it's just an interesting thing to see with Gen Z. I feel like they're pressing into the worship side way more.
Can you give us a little teaser of what you're going to be talking about?
Oh, yeah, totally. I'm going to be talking a little bit about influence, stewarding your influence well, what it means to have influence at such a young age. When you think of people who are influential, you think of like people who have a position of authority or status in the world. And I'm kind of pushing back on that a little bit. I'm just saying that sometimes our greatest influence is just in our circle. And what does it look like to widen that circle? That's kind of
I love that.
the kicker.
Why do you think, okay, so speaking of that, I think there is definitely almost an age discrimination where people feel like you're too young to have any real influence. Why does the church actually need young adults? What can we learn from them?
Yeah, I mean, I think like always taking advice from people that are younger than you is going to keep you up to date on what's going on. It's going to keep you fresh, but it also just brings in new eyes. I mean, I think whether it's someone who's young in age or someone who is new to the faith, but they're 60, or someone who's brand new to a certain role or position at a company or in the church or whatever that looks like, having someone who comes in with fresh eyes can oftentimes reveal opportunities for growth and innovation and change that someone who is seasoned might not see. But I think that totally goes both ways. I'm not, the young adult who's screaming from my soapbox, everybody's got to listen. I think, the more young adults can, and I'm talking about this a little bit at Young Adult Night, but the more we can widen our circle of not only influence, but discipleship. Who's pouring into you? Who are you learning from? Those things can fast track our growth like crazy too.
I will say this. I noticed that about you, Connor, because I've been on staff at Grace and we've been in the same circles, and you came in, you're highly gifted. I've heard you speak. You're a phenomenal speaker. You also are the pastor's kid, at a large church. So people watch you, and I wondered if there would be a little bit of a like, I'm ready to lead, I've arrived. And it's not. You came in very humble. Like, I'm going to listen more than I speak. I'm going to learn. I think that is huge. It buys a lot of respect in other people's eyes. Tell me this. Do you think the church is doing a good job at connecting with young adults? And what could the church do better?
That's a great question. Are we talking our church or the church?
No,
the global church.
Yeah.
Yeah.
In general, is the church doing a good job?
In general, like across, that's a hard question. That's a hard question for me to answer. I don't know.
Or maybe what could the church do? Like if you were kind of saying, okay, you're a church leader, young adults are hungry. We're seeing revivals at college campuses. They're going to be flooding into churches. What can you do to meet them where they are?
Yeah. Here we go. I got this. I think with young adults, with anybody young, oftentimes the assumption is, okay, once they've, reached a certain level of being responsible as a person, that's when they are rewarded with a responsibility equivalent to that. Does that make sense?
Correct. Yes. Earn it.
You have to earn it. You have to fight for it. And I think in some very, sacred areas that should totally be true. But I feel like in my life, I've grown the most when I wasn't ready for something and somebody threw me head first anyways. And I was like, all right, I've got to figure this out. I've got to grow. And so I think it's, for me, really what it is it's challenging young adults, whether it's, you're a church leader and they're on your staff, or you're a pastor and they're volunteers or people in the room. How do you challenge them to do more and be more than even they think they can? Because every time a leader has done that in my life, it's transformed everything for me.
Wow. Because you rise up to meet the challenge.
Yeah.
Like, hey, what? The scary part then for the leader is you have to be willing to let them fail a little and say,
totally.
hey, and maybe they'll shine at it, maybe not. That's great advice. Use their passions, challenge them even before they're ready. Anything else you wish that maybe older generations understood about Gen Z?
I think, what we were talking about right at the very beginning, it is kind of a cliche that like, this new generation, it was, at one point Gen X and then millennials and now it's Gen Z is like falling apart and ruining the world. But I think even just that little bit of encouragement that like Gen Z is coming back to the church.
Yeah.
And so be ready for it. Like welcome them with open arms. And how can you as someone who's older encourage that and help support that? I think that's super important.
I saw an article the other day from Axiom, and it was like church stats and stuff like that, and it actually said that Gen Z is the first time ever we're seeing a trend where there's more guys than females in church. Like Gen Z men are leading the charge more than ever. I thought that was really encouraging.
That is really encouraging.
No other generation has that been the case. And they also said like a higher rate of engagement than any other generation, which I was like, wow. I mean, are there places where you're seeing signs of revival yourself? Like,
oh yeah. I mean, I I'm there all services every weekend at church, and I like no service goes by where I don't talk to young adults who are like eager and like trying to jump in. How do I get plugged in? How do I serve? How do I help? So I think it's happening right here at Grace. I mean, there is a need for young adults to get plugged in, but there's also a maybe even greater desire for them to jump in from the young adult perspective. So that's super exciting to me. I absolutely love that.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
You yourself, you're always reading books and things. Tell us what are some of the latest things influencing you?
So one of the best books I've probably ever read, I read last month in April. That would be last month, right? Yep. It was Turn the Ship Around. Captain David Marquis in the Navy. He wrote it, and he was assigned the worst submarine in all of the Navy. It was the Santa Fe, and it was docked at Pearl Harbor in Hawaii. And basically, he talks about how he, used his revolutionary leadership style called leader, which, is the way that he describes that he wants to be a leader who creates leaders, not a leader who creates followers. And how that just completely changed really the Navy as a whole over time. But, it started small. It started with this little submarine that he was managing and how he created people who owned and were responsible for the things that they were doing. So, that's...
So leadership management, really. It's not a Christian book. It's just like...
No, I'm not sure that he is a Christian.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I love that.
Did you want a Christian book?
No. I love to read books about leadership management, those kind of things too. I think you learn a lot from them.
Oh, yeah, no. It was phenomenal. I really, really enjoyed it.
Okay, so we've been talking about, Gen Zers coming back to church. What would you say to the 20-something who's still skeptical? Like, meh, I don't need the church. I don't want it. That's uncomfortable. What would you say to them?
Try it out. Yeah, I think... Have you ever heard the phrase of, it's talking about going to the gym, but it's like the heaviest weight in the gym is the front door? Like, it's like, just get in there and it'll be okay. Yeah, I think a lot of people have these like stereotypes about the church that keep them, afraid and skeptical. But it's most often, as long as you pick a good church, not what you're expecting, in the best way possible. I think oftentimes the, level of, love and joy and community that the church radiates is super appealing to someone. Just, they've got to get in the front door first. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, so what excites you about the future of the church? Like both Grace Church, but then also just the Big C Church. Yeah.
Yeah. I want to hear your answer first.
What excites me about the future of the church?
Yeah.
I think that for me, Gen Z's passion is still kind of a mystery. I'm not part of that generation. I look at my kids coming up and I'm like, if this is true, and I follow Jenny Allen and like some of the big trends of like revival happening on college campuses, I kind of want to understand it. Like, what is that energy? What are people tapping into? Because the hope I have is that energy is going to capture my kids. Like, they're going to get excited about not just checking church off of a box, but being there, But to me, I still don't fully... I don't know, is it just a move of the spirit? Is it just, like you're saying, a reaction to AI and social media? Yeah. The power of human connection? What exactly is it?
Yeah.
But I'm excited by that.
Yeah, it is super exciting, and I think honestly, I really don't love the phrase, but people all the time in my generation will say it's a relationship, it's not a religion,
Right.
And I think the idea there is like it is a personal interaction with God, and not just Christianity, which is responsible for the Crusades and all these things throughout history that is like not so great. And I think the better way of saying that is, I saw this the other day. I'm gonna make sure I don't butcher it, but it was Christianity without communion with God is just philosophy. And I think there's a level there where it's like that communion with God, and I'm not talking about dipping the wafer in the cup. It's like just being in a personal, intimate relationship with God is what's going to change your faith. I mean, Christianity is, I think it's what I said. It's just a philosophy if you're not actually interacting with God. And I think that can be, there's that scripture. I can't quote it from memory, but it's along the lines of like, many people will get to heaven and God's going to say, I never knew you. And they're going to be surprised by that. And that's terrifying.
Yes.
But I think that is a result of just being a Christian and not being in relationship with God.
That head-heart disconnect or gap. Absolutely.
Yeah.
I love that you just flipped that and asked me that question. Do you have any other questions for me while we're on the subject? As the resident old lady who's not a Gen Z?
How do you feel like
about your dad?
How do you feel like most young adults, Gen Z, how do we come across?
That's a great question, Connor Atkins. I think that. Oh, that's a really good question.
Come on, be real, be honest.
I'm filtering my answer. My
no,
first
don't
thought was
filter
sometimes a little bit maybe arrogant.
Yeah.
Not you particularly, but I'm thinking about.
Thanks for throwing that caveat in there. I appreciate
that's
it.
probably my own bias. Like, I think every young generation comes up with a little bit of an attitude of like, we know everything. If I could say the number of times my 13-year-old's like, oh, cringe, mom. Like, everything that comes out of my mouth is like, that's so dumb. And I'm like, you're so dumb. But I have been alive a little bit longer. So I think that a little bit know-it-all, the younger generation always has that like, no, this is what we do now. This is cool. And my friends and I were joking about even the language. They were like, it's some word. I can't remember what the word was. Maybe selling. Okay. Yeah. I can't remember if it's good or bad to be selling. But I was teaching this to my other 40-year-old friend, and she was like, this is so dumb that they've changed words that are like normal. And I said, we did that. We did that. Like fat, like square back in the day. It's like, and she's like, I guess we did. Every generation does, but they think they're the coolest. But I would say on the positive, to me, Gen Z is sincere. I think they come across like longing for real things, not just the words and the talk. I think they're more vulnerable than ever. Like, I feel like there's a unguardedness about them to just be like, this is my story, this is my stuff. Whereas I feel like maybe that's some of the internet culture too, of like all these. I am impressed with these Gen Zers who get on camera. It looks like absolute, like not high production at all. And they just like toss their hair and like so for real talk about whatever. And it's like viral because there's a longing for connection. Right. So I think there's there's an authenticity, there's a vulnerability that's very endearing about this generation.
So jumping back to the arrogant thing, how do you, what are the action steps? I mean, how do I not come across arrogant as a young adult?
I think that's older people's bias. The reality is that, and I'm probably thinking about younger, more teen generation that's like, you don't know anything. That comes across arrogant. But I think for you in the workplace, what you did was brilliant because you came in listening and humble and asking questions more than just being like, no, this is how we do things. I do really appreciate the young people in my life who will tell me what looks good and bad nowadays, what connects and what doesn't though. But you can do it humbly. Yeah. I also think ask questions to older people about the life experience stuff. You probably would be way better at designing a t-shirt than me because you know what is selling or what is cool. I don't know if I use that right. But let's say your parenting stuff is really hard. Yeah. Ask them the questions about those things. I think it makes it easier for us old people to take the cool advice when we still have a voice of influence. Like the wisdom's honored.
No, I think it's all. I think it's great that you said those, asking questions, but also giving advice in the right areas, right?
Exactly.
And I think like my relationship with my dad is a great example of that. Like all the time, I mean, it's like an ongoing joke in our family. I'll call my dad, he picks up, and the first thing I say is, question for you. And it's like, I mean, 3 times a day. I just call him and I'm like,
Really?
quick, yeah. Well, I'm just like, hey,
Yes.
I'm 22 years old. How long do I put this in the microwave for? Like, it doesn't have to be something
those
incredibly
questions
deep.
I was like, wow, you have access to Pastor Mike. I'm sure you do. No,
no,
not
just
the
like
microwave.
parent questions. How do I live my life? So I think it's like there's wisdom I can grab there, but also like this is the inside scoop. I totally call my dad out. Like he would tell you this 4 years ago, 5 years ago maybe, and was like, you've got to start like tailoring your pants or something, like start dressing better. And he did, and he listened. And that was a lot of like wisdom there to be like, hey, maybe there's something to this. And I think it made a big difference. I mean, go back to the old, they're online somewhere. There's like 5-year-old videos of him teaching in the most horrendous outfit you've ever seen. Love him to death.
This is you're right. It's that like shared learning from both. When I go speak somewhere, I ask all my young friends, and they'll be like, hard no. What about this? Go back and forth and share. Anything else your dad has learned from you?
Oh man.
So style. We have you to thank for that.
Style. Yeah, I mean, I think there's like the normal parent-kid stuff, like, hey dad, that's an AI video of that dog. He's not really cartwheeling. Whatever it is. But no, I don't know. That's a good question. Maybe come back to you on that one.
Okay, what are some of the best things you've learned from him? If you had to say some of your favorite lessons.
Man.
Or things that have stuck with you and maybe shaped you more than other things.
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think everything that he just says on stage at the church, like his like token phrases, which I love, like, good is ahead, time and truth run hand in hand, the strong protect the weak, the things like that. It was kind of surreal for me because for probably 5 or 10 years before he was ever using them in his messages, he was telling it to us. And so I think all of those things that you hear, not only are they real and they're what he believes, but they're what he's instilled in us from like a super, super young age. Just me and my siblings as his kids. I've been hearing the time and truth runs hand in hand for a really long time. And that one specifically, I think, is super helpful to me because if you know anything about the Enneagram, I'm in Enneagram 3, which is a fancy way of saying that I like to achieve and accomplish, but mostly it's driven by what do other people think about me. Yeah. I'm very aware of that and cautious of that, which has its pros and cons. But I think that whole time and truth runs hand in hand thing has allowed me to say, how do I seriously, legitimately build character behind the scenes and not just project good character?
Yes.
Because otherwise it's going to just blow up in my face one day when people peel back the curtain and say like, whoa. So I think that's probably the biggest thing.
And because you are talented, you probably can project good character. It's so wise of you. Yeah. But it's so wise of you to say, how do I actually build it and become that so that it doesn't blow up? That's very, very good. I actually just used time and truth go hand in hand, like literally the other day with one of my kids who was talking about a relationship. And I was like, be patient. Time and truth. Like, you know what I mean? If there's someone who's always talking junk about other people, you keep your integrity. Yeah. It will, but that was a Mikeism that I got. I love it. There's ones like that I hold on to myself too. Yeah. Okay, so before we go, we need a good plug for Young Adult Night. Okay, so we want you to look into the camera.
This one here?
Which one? This one here. Tell us, when is it? What can we expect? Okay. Young Adult Night.
Here's my young adult being arrogant. The best sermon you've ever heard. Come for that. That's going to be super awesome. It's on May 23rd at 6 p.m. Get there right at 6 p.m. because we're doing 2 sessions, and the break in between will be dinner. The dinner's going to be fantastic. You're going to love it, I promise. We have a fantastic worship set. I was just with the worship team planning it today. We're bringing in some guest singers, if that's what you want to call them, contracted musicians, just to make sure it's extra excellent. Be there. It's going to be awesome.
Oh, I love it.
I'm looking forward to it.
Okay, I may have to check that out. You think I could pass for 20?
Yeah. Just slide in the back.
Slip in the back.
Join us.
Thank you so much, Connor Adkins.
Happy to do it.
Grace After Hours is a production of Grace Church in Orlando, Florida. Grace's mission is helping people take their next step towards Christ. Learn more at discovergrace.com. If you enjoy this podcast, share it with someone you know and subscribe so you never miss an episode.